Hello and welcome. Independence and objectivity are concepts which many internal auditors are not fully aware of, but hopefully not after watching this video. The concepts of independence and objectivity defines the spiritual boundaries of internal audit function. We'll ask some basic as well as intriguing questions from ourselves, like what is independence, how is it defined, why objectivity is important, what are the requirements of IIA standard 1100, and what will you achieve by enhancing the awareness on importance of independence among the senior management and the board. Let's get answer to all these questions as well as some more questions in the process of this video. Standard 1100 is about independence and objectivity. It is part of the mandatory guidance of International Professional Practices Framework, and it is an attribute standard. The requirement of standard 1100 is pretty simple, but not that simple, because it requires internal audit activity to be independent, and also it requires the internal auditors that they must have to be objective in performing their work. So let's get some understanding of what is independence. Independence is freedom from conditions that threaten the ability of the internal audit activity to carry out internal audit responsibilities in an unbiased manner. What are those conditions? Often such conditions arise from the organizational positioning or placement of internal audit, as well as from the assigned responsibilities of internal audit function or the chief audit executive. For example, when internal audit reports within other functions in an organization, it is not considered independent of that function, which is subject to audit. Similarly, if the chief audit executive has functional responsibilities broader than the internal audit function, for example, like risk management, compliance, or pre-audit of payments, then the internal audit is not independent of these additional roles which he has been given to, and these roles are subject to audit. Let's ask a couple of questions from ourselves. Can chief audit executive solely determine the organizational independence, or can chief audit executive himself solely determine the positioning of internal audit function in the organization? The answer is a big no. Chief audit executive cannot. Why? Because chief audit executive needs help and support from the board and the senior management to address independence effectively. Typically, the chief audit executive, the board, and senior management reached a shared understanding of internal auditors' responsibility, authority, and expectations, which lays the groundwork for a discussion on independence and organizational placement. Depending on board and senior management's experience and expectations. Reaching a common vision may require numerous discussions. To increase the awareness of senior management and the board on the importance of independence and the means of achieving it. The key considerations such as reporting line, professional and regulatory requirement, benchmarking, and organizational cultural issues are important to consider. Generally, the internal audit charter will reflect the decisions reached regarding the internal auditor's responsibility, authority, and expectations, as well as organizational placement and the reporting lines. To achieve the degree of independence necessary to effectively carry out the responsibilities of the internal audit activity, the Chief Audit Executive has direct and unrestricted access to the senior management and board. This can be achieved through a dual reporting relationship. We'll discuss this dual reporting relationship when we will discuss the implementation guide on this. The threats to independence must be managed at the individual auditor level, engagement level, or functional level, and the organizational level. Objectivity. Objectivity is an unbiased mental attitude that allows internal auditors to perform engagements in such a manner that they believe in their work product and that no quality compromises are made. Here it is very important to understand that the objectivity requires that internal auditors do not subordinate their judgment on audit matters to others. So they have to be unbiased. Threats to objectivity must be managed in the same manner as we did for independence, that is at the individual auditor level, engagement level, functional and organizational level. As per implementation guide, to implement this standard, the Chief Audit Executive will want to understand these policies or activities within the organization or within the internal audit that could enhance or hinder such a mindset. For example, many organizations have standard performance evaluation and compensation policies, as well as employee conflict of interest policies. The Chief Audit Executive will want to understand the nature of relevant policies identified and consider their potential impact on the internal audit's objectivity. Internal audit will often customize these organization-wide policies to address internal audit roles specifically and may develop some other relevant policies specifically for internal audit, such as policies pertaining to training requirement. As we have learned that Chief Audit Executive work with the board and senior management to avoid conditions that would affect internal audit's ability to perform its duties or responsibilities in an unbiased manner. The Chief Audit Executive often has a direct functional reporting line to the board and an administrative reporting line to a member of senior management. The reporting line to the board provides the Chief Audit Executive with direct board access for sensitive matters and enables sufficient organizational status. The administrative reporting to a member of senior management also provides the chief audit executive authority to perform duties without impediment, and also provides a sufficient organizational status along with that. This is to address difficult issues with other senior leaders. But chief audit executive would not typically report to a controller or a mid-level manager who may be subject to audit routinely. The IIA recommends that the chief audit executive report administratively to the chief audit executive and functionally to the board of directors. Firstly, why to the chief audit executive? Because the chief audit executive is clearly a senior position, and secondly, the internal audit is not positioned within an operation that is subject to audit in case chief audit executive report to any other function. The chief audit executive should also be aware of any requirements from the regulators or other governing bodies that may specify a required reporting relationship. The implementation guide for standard 1110, which is the organizational independence, which standard which we will discuss in some of the later video, which will provide further details and guidance on chief audit executive reporting relationships. It is also recommended that chief audit executive not have the operational responsibilities beyond internal audit, as these other responsibilities may themselves be subject to audit. In some organizations, the chief audit executive is asked to assume operational responsibilities such as risk management or compliance. In such situations, the chief audit executive typically discusses the independence concerns and potential objectivity impairment with the board and senior management. Why? Because then the board, if they want internal auditor to carry on these additional responsibilities, then they will implement safeguards to limit the impairment impact. What these safeguards will be? The safeguards are oversight activities generally undertaken by the board to monitor and address independence conflicts. These examples are like periodically evaluating chief audit executive responsibilities, developing alternate processes to obtain assurance related to the additional areas of responsibility, and being aware of the potential objectivity impairment when considering internal audit risk assessments. How to manage the internal audit objectivity effectively? To manage internal audit objectivity effectively, generally the chief audit executives have an internal audit policy manual or handbook that describes the expectations and requirements for an unbiased mindset. Such a policy manual may describe the critical importance of objectivity to the internal audit profession, typical situations that could undermine objectivity due to self-interest, self-review, familiarity, bias, undue influence. Some of the examples may include when you're auditing in an area where an internal auditor recently worked, auditing a family member or a close friend, or assuming without evidence that an area under audit is acceptable based solely on prior positive experience. Actions the internal auditor should take if he or she becomes aware of a current or potential objectivity concern, such as discussing the concern with an internal audit manager or chief audit executive, reporting requirements where each internal auditor periodically considers and discloses a conflict of interest. To reinforce the importance of these policies and help ensure that all internal auditors adopt and understand the importance of these policies, some chief audit executives will hold routine workshops or trainings or interactive sessions on these fundamental concepts, where they will be having better understanding of the objectivity by considering objectivity impairing scenarios and how best to address those situations. Further, when assigning any internal auditor to specific engagement, the chief audit executive will consider potential objectivity impairment and avoid assigning team members who may have a conflict. So this is a very important point. Let's focus on this. It is widely understood that the performance and compensation policies can significantly and negatively affect an individual's objectivity. For example, if an internal auditor's performance evaluation, salary, or bonus are significantly based on client satisfaction surveys, the internal auditor may hesitate to report negative results. That may cause the client to report low satisfaction rating, and ultimately it will affect his performance evaluation, salary, or bonuses. Therefore, chief audit executive needs to be thoughtful here in designing the internal audit performance evaluation and compensation systems, and consider whether the measurements used could impair an internal auditor's objectivity. Ideally, the evaluation process will balance the internal auditor's performance, the audit results, and the client's feedback measurements. The implementation guide for standard 11120 individual objectivity provides further guidance on objectivity. So what are the considerations for demonstrating conformance? Multiple items may indicate conformance with the standard, including the internal audit charter itself, an organization chart with the reporting responsibilities, an internal audit policy manual that includes policies on independence, objectivity, addressing conflict and performance evaluation, training records, and conflict of interest disclosure forms. If applicable, documentation showing disclosure of impairment consistent with standard 1130, which is on the impairment of to independence or objectivity, may also become the part of demonstrating conformance. So here we conclude our discussion on standard 1100, independence and objectivity. We learned the standards requirement on independence and objectivity. What is the meaning of independence and objectivity, we understood with some examples. We also checked the requirement of implementation guide and what are the methods or techniques a chief audit executive can use to implement independence and objectivity in its basic spirit, as well as how the conformance can be demonstrated by maintaining certain documents. Thank you so much and keep watching my videos. Please do like and subscribe.